Hi, welcome back to Jumpstart Code. In this video, we are going to experiment with float and understanding how we can use this in our layouts. If you remember the little kid's toy of a little puzzle game where things slide around, that kind of mental picture kind of helps me when I understand a little bit of what's going on with float. So let's get into it so I can explain. So I've got a very simple example here, and actually the first thing we need to talk about is how elements are presented on the page. And HTML has what they call block elements and inline elements. A block element always starts on a new line, takes up the full width of your page, and it has a margin. So for example, here are all the block level elements. So a paragraph is a block element. All the headers, your list elements are all block elements. An inline element does not start on a new line. It takes up only as much width as it needs. So a span element is an example of an inline element. And another important inline element is an image. All right, so let's see what I mean by this. So I have this example where I have a header, I have an image, I have some text, kind of some goofy little text there to show you where I got that from. If you Google lorem ipsum, you will find these places to just grab some text, and that can help you sometimes when you're just playing around with layout. So I have a paragraph here, I have a second image, a second paragraph, and a third paragraph. Don't worry about the ID right there for right now. So we save that, we refresh that, and this is what it looks like. Now, right now, it's kind of looking like these images are acting like block elements because they're on a line to themselves. But that's only because there's just one image. So just to show you, I'm going to put two images side by side there at the beginning. And now you'll see what I mean by it being an inline element. It only takes up as much space as you have as the width of that element, right? Now, let me take it back because what I want to show you is how to float these images and let the text flow around them. And so to do that, we want to use a property called float. And to make it easy to kind of experiment, I am setting up in my style sheet two classes. Remember, when you set up a class, you use a dot in front of it. One called float right, and this is the syntax of how you float something to the right. One called float left, and this is the syntax. Notice having really meaningful names to these classes really helps you. If I name these classes ABC and XYZ, it would be hard to remember which is which. So let's go over here. So that means if I want to apply to this first image, if I want to float it, let's say to the right, then I will add class equals float right. All right, and again, my style sheet is linked up here at the top. So let's see what that does. So now you see this image floats over to the right and text can flow around it. So it's kind of like that little puzzle idea that you move that particular image up to the right corner and other things move in to fill in the space underneath it, right? For the second image, why don't we set it to float left? Class equals float left, right? So let's save this, go over here, refresh. So now you see that I'm demonstrating both. I can have an image that's floating to the right, another image that's floating to the left, and the text is flowing around it. Now you might look at this and say, I don't like that text being so close there. A lot of doing HTML and CSS is you got to focus on one thing at a time that you are trying to make an adjustment to. So to make an adjustment to that, remember our box model, that there's a border around, you can have a border around an element, and you can apply spacing inside or outside of that border. So I'm going to go over here to my CSS, and for my image here, which this is also where I set up the sizing so that all those images would have the same size, I'm going to apply a margin of 10 pixels. And that is going to apply all around the picture. So do you see there? Now we have space around that picture. So that shows you how you can apply floating, and you can control where your image will be located based on using the float property. So in future videos, we'll talk a little bit more about getting a little fancier with what we're doing. But again, the focus here is on floating to the right, floating to the left. And if I want them both to, I'll just show you, if I want them both to float to the right, so once I have those classes, then I can apply them. So if you have a lot of different pictures, then you can do that, right? And so now that one floats to the right as well. You know, it starts to look a little, I have to play around with this in terms of what do I really want, where do I really want both these pictures to go. That's why in this particular case, I think it's easier to have one on one side, or it's nicer to have one on one side, one on the other. This is also why you really have to start off kind of sketching out what you want your layout to look like in order to determine how to build it properly.